Hello, my name is Ben Christopherson. We're here in Ealing at the University of West London, and today we are going to take a look at making a mille feuille with some puff pastry. So you'll need a piece of puff pastry which is nice and well rested, and what you're going to do is you're going to roll out a sheet of the puff pastry about 3 millimeters thick. Try and roll it to the same size as the tray that you've got prepared, and you're going to dock it on the tray, and then you're going to chill it down, let it rest as much as possible. That's really important for this dough because it will try and shrink back. And then you're going to bake it, and then afterwards you're going to cut it to size. You're going to fill it with some pre-prepared creme patisserie, and then we'll glaze the top with fondant, and then we'll feather it, and then we'll tidy it up and we'll portion it off. All right, so start off by rolling this pastry dough, this puff pastry. Again, you want to try and make sure you use as little as possible with the flour. And when you start off with this block of puff pastry, don't just immediately start rolling it. You want to be quite gentle and just press it down. And what you're doing is you're obviously changing the shape of the dough, but you're doing it nice and gently so that you're not squeezing the fat, breaking the lamination too much. It also means that you're going to get a nicer, easier shape to work with. When you're making products like Mille Feuille or Napoleon or Tivier, Gâteau Saint-Honoré, any of the puff pastry dishes, you have to remember, the key is in the name a little bit, that the dough will puff. So something 2 or 3 mils will puff up to about 6 or 8 centimeters. So do roll it thin. Don't be afraid, that you're rolling it too thin. If the recipe says roll it 2 mils or roll it 3 mils, do try as best you can to roll it to that nice thin consistency, and obviously as equal as you can do. And again, I'm just moving the dough around. 2 reasons: because I want to try and pick up the flour on the table rather than adding more, and also because I'm putting air underneath the dough and I'm letting the dough shrink back a little bit naturally. So it's the dough's almost working with me instead of me working sort of against it. So again, what I've done is rolled the dough to sort of the length of the pin, the breadth of the pin rather, so that I can roll this nice long sheet, and that long sheet will fit on top of this tray, so I don't have to sort of trim it down unnecessarily. And when I'm rolling, I'm always trying to roll the same sort of pressure on the pin as possible, to try and get it as equal as possible. Okay, so that's about 2 mils at the moment. So I'll just transfer that onto that tray. And give it a chance to relax a little bit. And this relaxing period is really, really important. If you try and cook that puff pastry sheet now, it will elasticate, shrink back into a shape which is not going to be very useful to you. But if you chill it for a minimum of 30 minutes, it's much better to do it for around about an hour, then the dough won't move very much at all, and you'll get much more yield out of your recipe, and you'll get a nicer texture, and you'll get a better quality product in the end. So just before I chill this down, I'm just going to dock it. If you've got a nice rolling docker, that's going to save you a bit of time, but if you don't, it doesn't matter, you can just use a fork. It just takes a little bit longer. And the reason that we dock it is that we want to try and make sure that the rise is as equal as possible. What you're doing is you're pushing the dough together in these separate areas, and you're making sure that there isn't a larger air gap in one area over another. You're essentially breaking the air gap down. and we're also, essentially controlling the rise in the product. Okay, so I'll cover that with another piece of paper, put it into the fridge, minimum half an hour, let it relax, and then we'll cook it with another sheet of paper on top and a tray or 2 trays on top to really push it down to stop it rising up too much. So into the fridge it goes. Right, that's had an hour resting in the fridge, so it's in a much better state, ready to be cooked. And what we're going to do is we're going to cook it with a piece of paper on top and another heavy tray on top to control the rise a little bit. It's going to stop it over rising. It's going to keep it a nice controlled thickness rather than it being too thick in the finished product. So take your tray, put it directly on top, and then cook it in the oven. You want to cook it at around, again it does depend on your oven, around 190 I'd say for a convection oven and around 200 for a deck oven. And it will take probably around 25 to 30 minutes, but always check it. I would check it after 20 minutes. Have a little look underneath, maybe spin the tray around, maybe change the position in the oven, and you want to try and aim for a really nice dark golden brown. So you've taken your puff pastry, and you've cooked it in the oven between the sheet of paper and the heavy tray on top, and you've controlled the rise of the puff pastry and got it to a lovely golden brown colour and a nice texture as well. So what we're going to do now is cut 3 equal slices, so that will form the parts of the mille feuille, and then we'll use a pre-prepared pastry cream to fill it, and then we'll press it before we glaze it with the fondant. So what you want to do now is you just want to calculate your pieces to make sure they're the same. So what I'll do is I'll trim off these 2 parts on the end here. And then just calculate the length. So just make sure you measure it up correctly, and then divide it by 3. So that's 13. So we'll have. So just mark it off. And I always just double check just to make sure that I'm accurate. To make sure that we've got it more or less how we want it. They don't have to be absolutely perfect, they don't have to be to the millimetre, but just so you've got them more or less correct, because you're going to trim it again later on. Okay, so you've got your 3 pieces, and the 3 pieces can go on top of each other, and then we'll put the creme pat in, and then we'll press it a little bit, chill it right down so that it's set before you cut it. If you don't chill it down before you cut it, you'll come to cut it, the slices, and the pieces will slide apart. Because creme pat, when you make creme pat, when you chill it, it will firm up again in the fridge after you've softened it. So that's an important thing to remember, is that you can soften it and re-firm it back up again. If you have done what I've done here and got them a little bit unequal, don't worry too much. You can always either trim it off now or trim it off later. Even though I used a ruler, I still managed not to quite get it right. So. Okay, so it's important to get these layers the same, nice and neat and exact as possible. So what we'll do is we'll weigh it on, and again I'll use a board just to make my life a little bit easier. So I'll take the base. If you've got lots of excess crumbs on there, do brush it off, because it will cause problems for you. So when I'm making this for a fresh product, which is going to be used on the same day, I'll set it on the day. If I'm using it for a pastry shop and it's got to sit on a counter for sort of 12 hours or so and needs to have a bit more extended shelf life, we'll make it the night before, set it overnight, and then cut it in the morning. And if you do that, brush this with cocoa butter, so a little bit of melted and room temperature cocoa butter. Brush it on the top, let it set, and then put the layers, and do it on all the layers. And what it does is it prevents the puff from going soft over the period of the day. So it gives you just that little bit more time to work with the dough, work with the product. So I'm going to put 250 on each layer. And then you're going to repeat the process for all the sides. These bits that come over the edge, it's good to be as neat as possible, but you're going to trim it again a little bit later on. So not too much of an issue. So on top of that layer, a little bit. I'm just checking the pieces. They're all quite nice and flat, but I'm just looking for a top one which is as flat as possible, which I'll have as that one, because so when I put my fondant on, it doesn't, get lost in some of these bumps on top. So next piece on. And with this product, the Mille Feuille, you can really use your creativity, your imagination to have any flavours you want, because you can flavour pastry cream as you like it, with chocolate or nut pastes or infusions, however you like it, really. So you can use, it's a real opportunity to use, seasonality and creativity. You see all sorts of different types, green tea and praline, different nuts, chocolate types. So it is something you can be quite creative with. So that one goes on top. Just press it down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on a tray, put another weight on top, just another tray with maybe a jar on top, just a little bit of pressure. Not too much pressure because I don't want to squeeze all the pastry cream out the sides, and enough just to set it and to allow it to get a little bit firmer. So here we are with the Mille Feuille. We've just let it sit in the fridge just enough for the pastry cream to settle down, get it nice and flat, get the layers as equal as possible. The weight I've put on top is not particularly heavy, but it's just enough to make sure that it's all flat and nice and as equal as possible. So next bit we're going to do is we're just going to cover it with a layer of fondant. So I've just pre-prepared the fondant here, just make sure it's at the right temperature and the right texture. So kept it really nice and cool, so keeping it around 37 degrees. And I've just adjusted the consistency a little bit with some stock syrup, just so it flows nicely. But the key thing is to keep it around 37 degrees to make sure that it stays shiny, doesn't go dull, and when it sets, you can make sure it sets off nicely, so when you cut it, it's nice and clean and tidy. So just make sure you use a step palette knife. You've got plenty of space. You're going to put some of the fondant on and then slide it down. You don't want it too thick. Too thin and you'll be able to see through and see the pastry, so you don't particularly want that. You also want to have some warm chocolate, so in a paper corner, so that you can pipe on the lines afterwards. And then you want to use either a toothpick or a knife just to score the top. So you'll score across and then you'll score in the other direction, just to create that feathered appearance. You need to have a cloth as well, just to make sure you can wipe that knife each time you've done it, just to make sure you don't discolour the top. Okay, so make sure your fondant's flowing nicely. I'm just going to put the chocolate on, do a nice thin cut. Just do a little practice first, make sure the chocolate flows nicely. And then use your knife and then come across. Just giving it a wipe each time. turn it around and go back the other way. The sides, don't worry too much about with the paste, the sugar comes across the top. You will be going back over the top with a nice serrated knife and just trimming the sides down to tidy it all up when it's nice and firm. Okay, so once that's done, back in the fridge, get it to set off again, and then what you're going to do is you're going to trim it again, really nice sharp serrated knife, and then you can portion it up into the nice equal portions. So here is the Mille Feuille, which we've chilled right down in the fridge, purely just to make it easier to cut. If we don't chill it down in the fridge, when you come to cut it and trim it, all of the layers are going to move around a little bit. It's going to be a little bit difficult to cut. So what's left to do now is just to tidy up the sides. Somebody just tidying off a little bit, and then measuring it out, and then cutting it. So what you'll need is a serrated knife, some warm water, and then a J-cloth just to wipe your knife off on. So just tidying up these sides. If you can hold the top, because it will jiggle around a little bit. And your aim here is just to get these sides as neat and tidy as possible. So you can see the layers, and you can see all of the pastry cream and the puff. So we're going to start off by doing the two ends first of all. Try and make sure they're square as possible. I'm always just checking to make sure that I've got everything square so that the pieces come out square as possible, nice equal pieces. And when I'm trimming it as well, I'm really trying to trim it as little as possible, because again, like we mentioned before, puff pastries, labour intensive, high product cost, high ingredient cost. You don't want to trim off too much and have it as wastage. Alright, so here we have the Mille Feuille, so the edges are tidied up nicely now. So now all you need to do is portion it off. And so take a ruler, make sure you use a ruler, and this one we're going to do 3 centimetres across. So you're just going to mark it off nice and clearly so you can see it. Alright, so there's the Mille Feuille, and cut and then on the plate. And as you see, it's quite soft at the moment, so this is one we've made and prepped today. If you want it firmer and easier to cut, so you have a cleaner cut, you can prep it the night before, leave it overnight to really set off, and then slice it in the morning, and the pastry cream's completely set and makes it slightly easier, get a slightly cleaner cut. Otherwise, that's it. That's the Mille Feuille.